I've had the ROLAND SDP-SX PRO for a pretty good minute now, and I wanted to share how I've been making click tracks for myself and my band. So the first thing I do is get into my DAW, which I use Logic, and I do that to create the click. So let's go on over to the computer over here, and there she is. Actually, that's my camera. We'll say this is our song. Go into the Metronome Settings here, set it up how you want to set it up. I personally like the highest tone, and I set it to volume 2. Not that big of a deal here because I just normalized the audio and I want to make sure it's loud enough and that the pitch is high enough to cut through. Metronome is on, and there we go. So let's say we have an 18-bar song ready to go that I need a click track for. One thing I like to be sure I do, add some handles on each end. You know, little tails on there so it's long enough. If you don't have audio here when you bounce it, it's not going to include it, even if you have the loop on. At least it hasn't done that for me. You want to make sure you mute your audio track. Any tracks that you have on here. If all you want to hear is the metronome click, then have everything muted. So all we hear is the beat. So I'm going to Command B, and that's going to be a bounce. You'll have this window up. You'll want to have normalize on. That way, all that peaking it was doing, it'll be normalized and it'll be the same level in all of your separate tracks. One tip that I can highly recommend is to make sure you set the volume and the tone exactly the same for all the click tracks that you're going to create. Because the last thing you want to do is what I did. And that is to have one that sounded great, and then you move on to the next one, and it wasn't normalized, or it was louder and it was a different tone. It just throws everything off. You want consistency. The last thing you want is for everybody to just be confused. I export this as a WAV file, and we'll just hit OK. So you're gonna wanna have a thumb drive ready. These are pretty inexpensive. I got this one on Amazon. It's 128 gigabytes. I didn't pay very much for it. It was a 2-pack. I don't remember what it was. I don't get sponsored by anybody. I don't make any money anywhere. So just find a good brand. So I have my thumb drive labeled samples here. If you don't have a thumb drive set up for your Roland yet, you should. So that way you can make custom kits and custom sounds and all kinds of things. So inside of your USB drive, you should have an import folder. I'm going to name this my fake band's click track. All right, so here is my click track. I'm going to sample it to make sure it's all good. Sounds perfect to me. We're going to eject out your thumb drive, and we're gonna take this bad boy over to the pad. All right, so we've got our click track on the thumb drive, so we'll just go ahead and get this guy inside here. I'm gonna go handheld so you can see right here. So we got the thumb drive in. So now to import the file, we're just gonna go to the menu. We're going to go over to WAV, and we want to go to import. We're gonna go into the folder we created, select that one, and import it. Are you sure? I'm very sure. There we go. Hey, there's me. So we'll wait for that to be done. Still waiting. Didn't take that long. So if you have a long click track, it can take some time, but that's okay. All right, so now it is on the pad. Now we're gonna go back over to the computer because I'd rather do this inside of Roland's SDP-SX PRO application that they have for the desktop. So much faster, so much easier. So let's go back over there. All right, so we're back on the computer. We have our fake band's click track right here. This is for a song that does not have tempo changes or time signature changes. So I actually turn the pad off. I only put the file on the pad so that way it shows it on there. It says off if you don't have a file in there, and I don't like seeing a blank pad on my screen. Next thing you'll want to do is go down to your menus down here and go into your kit click. This is where you can actually send this file to the metronome inside the pad, so that way when you just click the click button on the pad itself, it'll actually just play your click track. Change the click mode to play wave as a click track. You've got a few different options here. The difference between play wave as click versus play wave as click track, the click track will just start your file start to finish and play it exactly how you had it. If you play wave as a click, then you are going to lose your accented beat if you have one. It's going to just play the click. I am going to set it as a click track because I created a custom click track that I want it to follow. So we'll drag that file to this box. Next thing I like to do is to set up a pad trigger. So now the metronome knows if I hit this pad, even though it's off, it's going to start the click track. I also like to set the trigger type to re-trigger. What this will do if things fall slightly off beat, just smack that pad when it should be on the first count and it'll just immediately re-trigger it to start from that second, that millisecond really. The output I set to phones only. I don't ever want it on my master because if I plug it into the master track as well, if I have a master out going to an external speaker like a PA, then everybody's going to hear the click track and I don't want that. If you want that click to be heard somewhere else, you can assign it to any of your direct ports here. I use direct 1 for my band members. That way, when I trigger it, whatever I've hooked up into that port on the back of the pad, that's going to hear the click track as well. I go ahead and set the tempo to the proper tempo. You can name your kit. I highly recommend that as well because you don't want a bunch of user kits out there. So my click band track sounds good. I like to put, this is 4/4, 155 BPM. And if I have created like a 2-bar count in, sometimes I'll make a note of that. Sometimes I don't. I actually just make a 2-bar count in no matter what. So I don't notate it anymore. All right, so I go over to the output. I don't want the master checked, so I unchecked that. I do want it in direct 1. So this is how I make sure that that gets routed to the band if I end up triggering the pad. All right, now let's say you have a song that has a few different tempos in it. Then what do you do? Because if it's just on this button inside kick click, I'm not able to just change the tempo when I want. You can make an entire backing track in your DAW that follows the timeline and adjusts the tempo accordingly. I actually like to trigger the tempo changes if I can, just because if somebody lags behind or gets ahead, then everything's going to be off. You can't restart the click because it just goes back to the beginning. What I found best is to just export different click tracks with the different BPMs, and I will assign them individually to the pads. So let's say this song called Frost, I start at 160 and then there's a drop to 125 BPM and then it picks back up to 140 BPM. So I now have these on. So with the kick click, I actually will leave a full click track for the song. If I just want to practice by myself to a backing track, I can just start this click and it'll just play it and I don't have to worry about switching it over. All right, so when you have tempo changes assigned to each pad, there's a few things you want to make sure you do. First thing, you want these to be set to alternate. Otherwise, it's going to replay the same sound on top of the other sound at the same time, and it'll be a mess. So don't do that. So alternate. You have to turn this on for each individual pad. Next thing I like to do is to set up a pad mute group. These pads here, we need to set up as mute groups. When I hit pad number 2, it's got to mute pad number 1. When I hit pad number 3, it needs to mute pad number 2. When I hit pad 2, pad 1's out. When I hit pad 3, pad 2's out. This doesn't really matter. I only set this up for pad 1 to turn off pad 3 if I feel like just going back to the beginning. So make sure your masters are all off. You're good to roll. So if you assigned your WAV file to play as a click track with the metronome button on your pad, like so, this is how it works. You're just gonna hit that button, or we set up a trigger for this pad to still work, and the pad is off, and it still worked. And it's set up as a re-trigger, so what that'll do, if the beat fell off a little bit, I can just re-trigger it. So if I had this set up as one time, this is what happens. Nothing's happening. If I set it up as alternate, turns it on and off. Retrigger, restarts it. Sorry. Yeah, so I think that's a great freaking feature. I like the retrigger. All right, so on the pad now, what we should have is a 160 BPM click track. When I switch, it just dropped, and it did not play over the other sound because we set up the mute group. Same for here, back to 140. And because I did alternate, I can hit the pad one more time, and we're good to go. One more cool thing, if you want to trigger your click track to play at the same time as your backing track, you can do that in the app as well. Let me know if you want to know how to link pads together, and I'll make another video for you. I hope that gave you a little bit of insight on how I create click tracks for myself when I'm practicing, as well as for my band members so they can hear a click too. If you like this video, please make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I'm trying to grow this channel. I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching this, and I'll create more if you want me to. You gotta let me know if this was worth it though. This took me a while. I work for you.